Jeremy stepped off the bus and into the heat of Los Angeles, the city where his dreams had led him. A black man from a modest background, he had always wanted to be a firefighter. It wasn't just the uniform or the thrill of the job. It was the desire to help, to be a hero when the world needed one. Now, he stood outside Fire Station 58, ready to begin his new life. The station was a big one, filled with experienced firefighters. Jeremy had just completed his training at the academy and was eager to prove himself. His mentors had taught him the essentials: how to fight fires, save lives, and work as a team. But here, on his first day, things didn't feel right. When the call came in, an apartment fire in South LA, Jeremy felt the adrenaline surge in his veins. He was ready, but as the truck roared down the street, he noticed something strange. His colleagues were distant. No one made eye contact with him. No one spoke to him. The fire was raging when they arrived, and chaos immediately unfolded. Jeremy rushed to the front lines, grabbing the hose, leading the charge to douse the flames. But his teammates, they stayed back. They seemed to be waiting for something, avoiding the hardest work. He noticed Mark, the senior firefighter, who was supposed to lead the team, giving him the cold shoulder as they worked side by side. Mark's eyes barely met his as they coordinated their actions. "Get the ladder, Jeremy," Mark ordered without a second glance. Jeremy, eager to do his part, ran to the truck and grabbed the ladder, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to prove himself. But as he set the ladder, he saw Mark and the others standing back, watching him do all the hard work. It wasn't the first time it had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. After the fire was out and the building secured, Jeremy's body was covered in sweat and ash. His hands trembled, but he kept his head high. The team gathered for a quick debriefing, but Jeremy couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The fire chief, an older man with graying hair, barely acknowledged his contribution. "Good job out there, Jeremy," the chief said, his voice flat. "But you need to work on coordination with the team. We don't want you rushing in like that next time." Jeremy nodded, swallowing the bitter taste of his words. He had saved lives. He had done the work no one else wanted to do. And yet, here he was, standing alone, invisible to the team that was supposed to be his family. It didn't make sense. He had worked harder than anyone else on that call, yet no one seemed to see him. In the days that followed, Jeremy noticed more of the same: the subtle exclusion, the way his colleagues would make excuses to avoid him during calls. They would pair off with each other, leaving him with the worst tasks, the most dangerous situations. It was like he was invisible, a ghost in his own team. At the firehouse, when they weren't on calls, it was just as bad. Jeremy would sit alone in the break room, quietly eating his lunch while the others laughed and joked in the corner, completely ignoring his presence. He couldn't help but wonder if it was because he was black. He had heard the stories, read the reports about racism in the fire service, but he had never expected it to be this blatant, this real. But the signs were there. Every glance, every whisper, every time they made him feel like an outsider, it all added up. One evening, after another long shift where he had been left to do all the hard work, Jeremy stood in front of the mirror, his reflection staring back at him with a mix of frustration and exhaustion. He was proud of what he had accomplished, but the weight of being constantly overlooked was starting to wear him down. "Am I really just the token black guy here?" he muttered to himself. It was a question he had been avoiding, but now it seemed to be the only thing that made sense. He had the skills, he had the heart, but that didn't seem to matter when it came to the people he worked with. A next call came late one night, a warehouse fire on the outskirts of the city. As the team geared up to leave, Jeremy felt that familiar tension in the air. His colleagues were quick to jump into the truck, eager to leave, but once again no one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. The drive to the scene was quiet, uncomfortable. Jeremy could feel the judgment in the air, and it made his skin crawl. When they arrived, the The fire was already massive, flames shooting out of the windows. Without thinking, Jeremy rushed into action, pulling his gear on and heading straight for the entrance. He knew what he had to do, but as he moved toward the door, he noticed that no one was following him. His team was standing by the truck, watching him. "Someone needs to get in there and stop it before it spreads," he yelled back to them, his voice thick with urgency. But no one moved. Mark, the same senior firefighter who had avoided him earlier, looked away. A few moments passed, and then Mark's voice rang out. "Take the back entrance, Jeremy. We'll cover you from here." Jeremy didn't hesitate. He was used to it by now. Alone. Again. He moved swiftly, entering the building by himself, feeling the heat of the flames lick at his face. But this time, something was different. He wasn't going to let them treat him like this any longer. He was going to prove himself, even if it meant doing it alone. Inside the building, the heat was unbearable. His gear was heavy, and the smoke was thick, making it hard to see. But Jeremy pushed on, focusing on his goal, to save lives. He found the source of the fire in a storage room, and with expert precision, he started working to contain the flames. It was a struggle, but he was used to fighting battles on his own. As the minutes passed, the fire started to die down. Jeremy's body was exhausted, but he had done it. He had taken control of the situation, just like he had been trained to do. When he finally emerged from the building, covered in soot and sweat, he saw his team standing outside, watching him. Mark approached him, his face unreadable. "Nice job, Jeremy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jeremy nodded, but the praise didn't feel genuine, it felt hollow. He had saved lives, he had fought the fire, but all he received was a brief acknowledgement. And the feeling of being invisible lingered. He knew it wasn't just the fire he was fighting, it was the system. And the hardest battle was yet to come. Jeremy walked through the station the next morning, his uniform crisp and his mind sharp. He had grown used to the feeling of being an outsider, but it didn't make it any easier. The looks, the snickers, the cold shoulders, they were all still there. As he entered the briefing room, his eyes met Mark's for just a second. Mark looked away quickly. Jeremy felt the familiar pang of isolation. As the chief began his briefing, Jeremy took a seat in the back, his posture straight. The rest of the team was scattered around the room, chatting quietly, but no one sat near him. It was another busy day ahead, with several calls lined up. Jeremy couldn't help but wonder if he would once again be left out of the action. The calls had become predictable, the same pattern of exclusion. He would be sent to handle the most dangerous tasks, while the rest of the team would wait or stand back, watching from a distance. It wasn't just annoying, it was isolating. Every time he proved himself, every time he went above and beyond, it only reinforced the divide. No matter how hard he worked, they never treated him as an equal. That morning, they got a call about a burning car in an alleyway near downtown. Jeremy grabbed his gear without a word and headed for the truck. He could feel the weight of his colleagues' indifference as they piled in around him. No one spoke to him. The truck roared to life, and they sped down the street, the sound of the sirens filling the air. When they arrived at the scene, the car was engulfed in flames. Jeremy immediately ran toward it, taking charge without waiting for orders. He wasn't going to stand back this time. He was going to prove that he was more than just the black firefighter on the team. As he approached the car, he could hear his teammates shouting instructions, but none of them were moving. None of them were rushing to assist. Jeremy, frustrated but determined, grabbed the hose and began spraying the flames. He could feel the heat of the fire on his skin, his body drenched in sweat. He worked with all the intensity he had, fighting to control the fire before it could spread. It wasn't until the flames were finally under control that he heard someone behind him. Mark was standing there, watching him. "Nice work, Jeremy," he said, his voice void of emotion. The words felt like an insult. Jeremy stood there, his heart pounding in his chest as the fire was finally put out. He looked around, and for the first time in a long while, he saw a slight shift in the air. His team was still distant, still reluctant to acknowledge him fully, but there was something in their eyes now, something different. Perhaps it was a fleeting sense of respect, or maybe it was just the recognition that he had done the job no one else wanted to do. Regardless, it didn't change the fact that he was still fighting an uphill battle. The racism, the exclusion, it wasn't something that would go away after one successful call. He knew that. Back at the station, Jeremy tried to shake off the feeling of resentment that had settled in his chest. He had done the work, he had earned the respect, but it didn't feel like it mattered. He was still alone in the locker room. He was still the one who was always left to carry the heaviest load. The others joked and laughed, their voices carrying across the room, but no one bothered to include him. He tried not to let it bother him, but it was hard. It was always hard. Every day, he walked the same lonely path. His colleagues didn't understand the weight of what he was carrying, not just the physical weight of the job, but the emotional burden of being a black firefighter in a world that wasn't ready for him. A few days later, during a quieter shift, Jeremy sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. His mind was a million miles away as he thought about his family, his life before the firehouse. His father had always told him that life wasn't easy, that nothing worth having came without a fight. But no one had prepared him for this. No one had told him how hard it would be to carve out a place for himself in a system that was built against him. Jeremy thought about his childhood, about growing up in a neighborhood where the odds were stacked against him, but he had always found a way to push through. He had always found a way to rise above. It was then that he realized something. He wasn't going to let them break him. He wasn't going to let their silence, their avoidance, define who he was. He had come to this job with a purpose. He had come to prove that he could do this, no matter the obstacles. So he made a promise to himself. He wasn't going to let them see him as just the black firefighter. He was going to be the best damn firefighter they had ever seen, whether they liked it or not. It was a quiet resolve, but it was the fire he needed to keep going. The next call came a few days later. It was another fire, this time in an industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. As the team geared up, Jeremy could sense the usual tension, the silence, the avoidance. It was all there, hanging thick in the air. But this time, Jeremy wasn't going to let it get to him. As they arrived at the scene, the building was already half engulfed in flames. Jeremy wasted no time, grabbing his gear and rushing toward the front. He could feel the heat from the fire even before he got close, but he didn't hesitate. He ran in, determined to do what he had trained to do. Inside the building, the fire was intense. Jeremy fought through the smoke and heat, knowing that every second counted. He found the source of the fire and immediately began working to contain it. He moved with precision, his training kicking in as he fought the flames. Outside, he could hear his teammates calling out, but he didn't look back. This was his moment. He was doing the job. He was proving his worth. As the fire slowly started to die down, Jeremy could feel his body giving out, but he pushed through. He wasn't going to stop until it was over. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the fire was under control. Jeremy staggered out of the building, his body exhausted, covered in soot and ash. His team was waiting for him, standing at a distance. Mark was the first to approach. "Good work, Jeremy," he said, his voice a little warmer this time, but the words still felt hollow. Jeremy nodded but didn't respond. It didn't matter. He had done the job, and that was all that mattered to him now. He had earned his place, even if they never acknowledged it. Weeks passed, and the cycle seemed to repeat itself. Jeremy continued to do his job, day in and day out, but the exclusion remained. The calls came, and each time he was left to face the challenges alone. He had grown accustomed to the loneliness, the constant battle for respect, but it was beginning to wear on him. The firehouse had become a place where he was invisible. And no matter how many fires he put out, no matter how many lives he saved, it never seemed enough. Every day he wondered if things would ever change, if they would ever see him as more than just the black guy on the team. One morning, the team was called to a large residential fire in a wealthy neighborhood. The flames were roaring as they arrived, and the house was engulfed in smoke. Jeremy could feel the weight of the moment. This was a high-profile call, the kind that would be talked about for weeks. It could be the one that made the difference, the one where his teammates might finally recognize his worth. But as he grabbed his gear and started to head toward the house, he saw it again, the hesitation, the lack of trust. His colleagues were moving slowly, giving him the space he had come to expect. Jeremy gritted his teeth, but didn't let it show. Inside the house, the smoke was thick, making it hard to see. Jeremy led the way, staying calm despite the chaos around him. The heat from the flames was unbearable, but he pushed forward, knowing that lives were at stake. His teammates were trailing behind him, taking their time as usual. It was like they were waiting for him to lead the way, to make the hard decisions. Jeremy wasn't sure if it was out of necessity or if they were just too scared to take charge. Either way, it didn't matter. He was the one who had to keep going. He was the one who had to make sure they made it out. As they worked their way through the house, Jeremy heard a faint cry coming from upstairs. Without thinking, he moved toward the sound, pushing through the smoke and debris. He reached the top of the stairs and saw a family trapped in a room, their faces filled with panic. Without hesitation, Jeremy rushed toward them, his mind focused on getting them out. His teammates arrived a few seconds later, but by then, Jeremy had already begun pulling the family out. He could feel the heat and the pressure, but he didn't stop. The family was safe, but the fire was spreading quickly. They had to get out. As they made their way back down the stairs, Jeremy could feel the tension in the air. His teammates were moving more quickly now, but they still avoided him. The words of gratitude were absent. There was no thanks or good job this time. They were just doing their job, but it didn't feel like enough. It never felt like enough. When they finally made it outside, Jeremy was the last to step out of the house. He could see the fire trucks, the flashing lights, the cameras that had arrived to capture the scene. For a moment, he felt like he had finally done something worth acknowledging. But the moment was short-lived. His teammates were already talking to reporters, laughing as if nothing had happened. Jeremy stood off to the side, watching them, feeling the sting of their indifference. That night, as Jeremy lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. It wasn't the first time, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. He had done his job. He had saved lives, but it didn't matter. It never seemed to matter. The racism, the exclusion, it was all still there, lurking just beneath the surface. And no matter how many fires he put out, no matter how many people he saved, it was always going to be there. Jeremy turned over, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. How long could he keep going? How long could he continue to fight for a place that might never truly be his? The next day, Jeremy received a call from his mother. She had been worried about him, noticing the strain in his voice during their last conversation. "You're not going to let them get to you, are you?" she asked. "You're stronger than that." Jeremy sighed. He had always admired his mother's strength. She had raised him and his siblings on her own, dealing with her own battles. But this was different. This was a battle he couldn't fight the way she had. He couldn't just ignore the discrimination, the isolation. It was constant. It was in his face every day, in the way his colleagues treated him, in the way they avoided him. "I don't know, Mom," Jeremy replied, his voice quiet. "Some days it's harder than others. But I can't just quit. I can't let them win." His mother's voice softened. "I know, baby. I know. But don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you come from. You're not just doing this for you. You're doing it for all of us." Jeremy smiled at her words, grateful for the reminder. He wasn't just a firefighter. He wasn't just fighting for a job. He was fighting for his family, for his community. And as much as it hurt, as much as the isolation gnawed at him, he couldn't walk away. Not yet. Later that week, Jeremy received a call about a fire at a local school. The building was old, with wooden floors and narrow hallways, making it a dangerous situation. As they arrived, Jeremy noticed that his team was acting differently. There was no hesitation this time, no avoidance. They moved quickly, working together as a unit. Jeremy's heart raced as he realized what was happening. For the first time, they were treating him like an equal. For the first time, they were working with him, not around him. The fire was intense, but Jeremy didn't hesitate. He worked side by side with his team, each of them relying on the others to do their part. The teamwork felt like a victory in itself. They managed to get the fire under control, saving the building and the students inside. When the fire was finally out, Jeremy felt a sense of relief, but also something more, something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. He had done his job, but for the first time, he hadn't done it alone. His team had finally seen him for what he was, not just the black firefighter, but a skilled, capable part of the team. As they packed up to leave, Mark walked over to Jeremy. "Good work today," he said, offering a genuine smile. "You really pulled through." Jeremy nodded, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thanks," he replied, his own voice steady. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the first real recognition he had received in a long time. For the first time in a while, he didn't feel invisible. It was a small victory, but it was a step in the right direction. The weeks after the school fire seemed to have changed things, but Jeremy knew better than to get too comfortable. His teammates had treated him differently after the fire, but Jeremy was wary. He had seen this before: brief moments of acceptance, followed by a return to the same old exclusion. But this time, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. There was too much at stake. He had worked hard to get where he was, and if they expected him to prove himself every day, then that's what he would do. No matter how many times it took, he would keep showing them his worth. One morning, the station received a call about a fire in a downtown high-rise. The building was older, and there had been reports of people trapped inside. As the team rushed to get ready, Jeremy couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The atmosphere in the firehouse had shifted, but not in the way he had hoped. His teammates were focused, yes, but there was an undercurrent of tension. It was as if they were all pretending that things had changed, but deep down, they knew it hadn't. No matter how many fires he put out, Jeremy still had to prove himself every single time. When they arrived at the high-rise, the fire was already out of control. Flames were licking the sides of the building, and smoke was pouring from every window. The team quickly divided up into groups to enter the building, but this time, Jeremy noticed something different. He wasn't being ignored. For the first time, he wasn't the last one to go in. His teammates were with him, side by side, moving into the building together. It wasn't perfect. There was still that lingering tension, but it was a start. Inside the building, the smoke was thick and the air felt heavy. The fire had spread quickly and the structure was weakening. Jeremy knew that time was running out. His team worked quickly, but Jeremy kept his focus on the task at hand. He was no longer concerned with proving himself. He was just doing the job. The team moved together through the dark hallways, clearing rooms and searching for survivors. It was chaotic, but Jeremy had been in worse situations. The heat, the smoke, the uncertainty, it all felt familiar. They reached the top floor, and that's when they heard it. The sound of someone calling for help. A woman, trapped in her apartment, unable to escape. Without thinking, Jeremy moved toward the sound of her voice, pushing forward through the thick smoke. His team followed, but there was no hesitation now. They were working as one unit, each member supporting the others. When they reached the apartment, Jeremy found the woman collapsed near the door, coughing from the smoke. He knelt down to check on her, and in that moment, he realized something had changed. They weren't just working together out of necessity. They were working together because they finally saw him for what he was, a firefighter. After getting the woman to safety, the team continued to search the building, but the fire had already spread too far. The structure was beginning to collapse, and they had no choice but to retreat. As they made their way out, Jeremy couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about putting out fires anymore. It wasn't about saving lives. It was about finally being seen. For the first time, his teammates had treated him like one of them. He wasn't just the black firefighter. He was part of the team, and that was worth more than any medal or recognition. Back at the station, there was a quiet moment of reflection. They had done their job, and they had done it well. But it wasn't just about the fire. It was about the way they had worked together. As the team gathered to debrief, Mark turned to Jeremy. "You did good today," he said, his voice sincere. "We all did." Jeremy nodded, a small smile forming on his face. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt real. It wasn't just empty words. It was recognition. It was respect. Later that evening, as Jeremy sat in his apartment, he thought about the fire, about the way things had changed. He wasn't naive enough to think that everything was perfect now. He knew that things would still be hard, that he would still face challenges. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had made a breakthrough. He had earned his place. It wasn't just about fighting fires. It was about fighting for his right to be there, to be treated like everyone else. And even though the road ahead would be long, Jeremy knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had his team, and for the first time, they had him. The next few weeks were quieter, but Jeremy remained vigilant. He knew that one fire didn't change everything, but he also knew that he had made an impact. The team was different now, and he had earned their respect. Slowly, the tension began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Jeremy had fought for his place in the firehouse, and now he was finally starting to feel like he belonged. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about being part of something bigger, something meaningful. And for the first time, Jeremy didn't feel like he had to fight alone. One morning, as Jeremy walked into the firehouse, he noticed something strange. The usual silence had been replaced with chatter, the sound of laughter filling the air. It was a small change, but it was significant. For the first time, Jeremy felt like he wasn't just tolerated. He was accepted, and that, more than anything, was worth the struggle. As he walked to his locker, Mark called out to him. "Hey, Jeremy," he said, a smile on his face. "We're going to grab a drink after the shift. You in?" Jeremy paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm in." For the first time in a long time, Jeremy didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like part of the team. And that was the first real victory he had experienced since joining the firehouse. It wasn't the fires or the rescues that had changed everything. It was the small moments, the respect, the recognition, the understanding, that had finally made him feel like he belonged. And that, Jeremy thought, as he grabbed his gear, was worth everything. Months had passed since that high-rise fire, and though the atmosphere at the station had improved, Jeremy knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. His relationship with his colleagues had changed, but systemic discrimination wasn't something that could be erased overnight. The microaggressions, the subtle ways they still treated him as different, it was all still there, lurking just beneath the surface. But Jeremy was no longer willing to let those small moments define him. He had earned his place on the team, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away. One afternoon, the call came in. A massive fire had broken out in a residential area on the outskirts of the city. As Jeremy and his team prepared to leave, he could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't the fire they were worried about. It was the fact that they all knew this was going to be a big test. The firehouse had come a long way, but it hadn't reached its final destination yet. They were about to find out if they were truly a team, or if the cracks that had been covered up were going to break wide open under pressure. When they arrived at the scene, the flames were already engulfing several houses. The air was thick with smoke, and the heat was unbearable. As they suited up and prepared to enter the buildings, Jeremy saw the same old patterns starting to emerge. Some of the guys were starting to drift away, avoiding him when it was time to pair up. But this time, Jeremy wasn't having it. He wasn't going to let them push him aside. He was here for a reason, and he was going to make sure they knew that. The fire was ferocious, spreading quickly from one house to the next. The team worked with urgency, but the tension between them was palpable. Jeremy kept his focus on the job at hand, but it was hard to ignore the way his teammates were behaving. They were trying to divide the work, assigning him tasks that kept him away from the more dangerous areas of the fire. But Jeremy wasn't going to be sidelined. He wasn't going to be the one left behind. With a determined look, he moved forward, joining the group that was heading into the heart of the blaze. Inside the burning house, the heat was overwhelming. The smoke was thick, and the structure was unstable. Jeremy could hear the creaking of the beams overhead, but he pushed it out of his mind. His team was scattered, working to clear the house and search for survivors. Jeremy was in the kitchen when he heard a scream. A woman, trapped on the second floor. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the sound, moving quickly through the smoke-filled hallway. He knew he was alone. But that didn't matter. He had a job to do, and he was going to do it, whether anyone helped him or not. When he reached the stairs, the flames were already licking at the edges of the staircase. Jeremy hesitated for only a moment before sprinting up, the heat intensifying with every step. He reached the second floor and saw the woman, frantic, crying for help. She was trapped behind a fallen beam, unable to move. Jeremy's heart raced as he assessed the situation. He could hear his team working downstairs, but he was on his own now. It didn't matter. He had done this before. He had saved people before, and he would save her too. With a burst of strength, Jeremy lifted the beam off the woman, carefully pulling her to her feet. She was shaking, disoriented, but alive. He could hear the crackling of the fire getting louder, the floor beneath him beginning to give way. "We have to go," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. He guided her toward the stairs, but as they reached the landing, a beam fell between them, blocking the way down. The smoke was thickening, and the fire was closing in. Jeremy knew there wasn't much time. Thinking quickly, Jeremy spotted an open window on the opposite side of the room. It wasn't much, but it was a way out. He helped the woman climb out onto the roof, the flames behind them growing more intense by the second. The heat was unbearable, but they had no choice but to keep moving. Jeremy didn't hesitate. He led her across the roof, looking for a way to get down to the ground safely. It was dangerous, but they had no other options. Finally, they reached the edge of the roof, where a ladder had been placed by another team. With one final push, Jeremy helped the woman down to safety. He could hear the distant sound of sirens, but it felt like hours had passed. The fire was still raging, but they had made it out alive. When Jeremy returned to his team, he could see the surprise on their faces. They had expected him to be on the outside, waiting for orders. Instead, he had led the rescue, and he had done it alone. As they debriefed, the fire chief approached Jeremy. "You did good today," he said, his voice steady but full of admiration. "Real good." Jeremy nodded, but he didn't need the praise. He knew the truth. He had done his job, not because he needed recognition, but because it was what he had always done. For the first time, Jeremy felt like his place on the team was unshakable. He wasn't just a firefighter anymore. He was part of the family. In the days that followed, things at the station began to change in ways that Jeremy hadn't expected. The respect he had earned was undeniable, but more than that, he could feel the shift in the way his colleagues interacted with him. They weren't just tolerating him anymore. They were relying on him, trusting him, respecting him. It wasn't the end of the journey. There was still work to be done, but it was a victory. A small one, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. Jeremy knew that he had broken through the walls that had kept him isolated, and that made all the difference. As Jeremy sat on the roof of the firehouse one evening, watching the sunset, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The firehouse was no longer just a place where he worked. It was where he belonged. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He wasn't just the black firefighter. He was one of them, part of the team, part of the family. And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jeremy knew that no matter what the future held, he had already won the most important battle of all. He had earned his place.